just started my rotation on the night shift in the old city hospital, a place everyone whispered about, but never explained. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows across the empty corridors. Most nights were quiet, almost peaceful, until tonight. Around midnight, I heard the squeak of a gurney rolling in a hallway that should have been empty. I rushed to check, expecting a patient, but there was no one there. The gurney was moving on its own, inching toward the end of the hall before stopping abruptly. I froze, my heart hammering. Then the intercom crackled, and a voice, faint and tremulous, called my name.
Emily.
It wasn't a nurse. It wasn't a doctor. It sounded like someone I should recognize, but I couldn't place it. I followed the sound to the ICU, where all the beds were empty. On one of them, a thin sheet quivered, as if something beneath it was breathing heavily. I lifted the sheet. No one was there, but the bed was cold, and my own breath fogged in the sterile air. Behind me, I heard the wheels squeak again. I spun around, and the hallway was empty, but the intercom whispered again.
Don't leave.
Alarms would go off on machines that weren't even plugged in. Doors slammed with no wind. I felt like I was being watched, and every time I glanced down a corridor, a shadow would vanish just out of sight. By dawn I was shaking, convinced I had imagined it. But as I left, the janitor shook his head. You're lucky you made it through. I had been assigned to clean the rarely used wing on the 5th floor, the one everyone avoided. They called it Room 613. The paperwork said it was sealed due to mold, but the smell was different. Sharp, metallic, like iron mixed with something worse. As I pushed my cart down the hallway, I noticed the lights flickering, but it wasn't the usual faulty wiring. The shadows on the walls moved independently, stretching toward me as I passed. My instincts screamed to turn back, but a strange pull kept me moving forward. When I reached the door, it creaked open on its own. Inside, the room was empty. Sterile, but the bed looked freshly used. The sheets were folded neatly, yet there were depressions, like someone had just sat there. I stepped closer, and the temperature dropped sharply. My breath formed clouds in the dim light. A monitor beeped suddenly, though no machine was hooked up. I froze, staring as the screen flashed static, then displayed words. Don't look under the bed. My pulse spiked. Against every rational thought, I knelt down, curiosity winning. The space beneath the bed was pitch black, unnaturally so, as if it absorbed all light. A low, wet rasp echoed from under there, like fingernails dragging across concrete. I scrambled backward, hitting the wall, my cart tipping over. When I looked again, the bed was empty, but the faint outline of a person remained pressed into the floor, dripping dark streaks that vanished as soon as I blinked. I ran. The hallway stretched forever, doors opening and closing on their own. Whispers chased me, calling my name, yet I never saw anyone. When I finally burst into the lobby at sunrise, the security guard looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Room 613? They closed that wing years ago. I was finishing my late shift in the isolation ward, the section reserved for patients with highly contagious infections. Most nights, it was silent. Too silent, but that night felt different. It started with a faint tapping on the glass of one of the empty rooms. At first, I thought it was a loose window frame, but the tapping grew deliberate, rhythmic, like someone counting. I pressed my face to the glass, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing inside, pale and shrouded in shadows. When I blinked, it was gone. The The intercom crackled, cutting through the silence. A voice whispered,
"Help me."
It was weak, hoarse, almost gurgling, and yet it sounded disturbingly close, as if it were right behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just the faint hum of the ventilation system. I went to check the room, and the door was unlocked, which was impossible. Inside, the bed was empty, but a stain covered the floor. Dark, wet, and still spreading, as though something invisible had been lying there. My stomach churned, but curiosity forced me to step closer. Then I saw it. A shadow pressed against the wall. Humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs too long. Its head tilting in impossible angles. It stared at me with hollow sockets where eyes should have been. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. The shadow whispered again, this time calling my name, closer and closer. By the time the day shift arrived, I was slumped against the hallway wall, shivering, convinced I had imagined everything. The nurses found me and said gently, "You saw her, didn't you? She comes every night, only to those who work here alone." I was assigned to inventory medical supplies in the oldest section of the hospital, a part of the building that had been renovated so many times that the original layout barely made sense. Walls met at strange angles, and some hallways led nowhere. Still, it was supposed to be straightforward work. I brought a cart with me and started down the dim corridor, checking storage rooms one by one. Halfway through the list, my flashlight began to dim, even though the battery was full when I started. The overhead lights flickered, then steadied, but something felt off. The air had grown cold enough to make my fingertips numb. As I turned the next corner, I noticed a hallway I didn't recognize. It wasn't on the map, and I had never seen it before. The walls were bare concrete instead of the usual white tile, and the floor had deep scratches running along it, as if heavy equipment had been dragged repeatedly over the same path. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. My footsteps echoed unnaturally in the narrow space. The air felt heavy, thick, and the ceiling seemed lower the farther I walked. I felt a faint vibration beneath my shoes, almost like machinery running below the floor. But the hospital no longer used any systems that would cause that kind of rumble. I checked my watch, but the display was frozen. I tried to turn back, but the entrance behind me had vanished. The hallway stretched straight in both directions, perfectly symmetrical. My pulse climbed as I pushed forward, hoping to find an exit. Eventually, I reached a door with no markings. Creaked open when I touched it. Inside was a small room lined with empty beds arranged neatly, each one fitted with restraints. The sheets were spotless, but the mattresses were sunken, as if someone had lain there for far too long. The air carried a faint sourness, like something left sealed for decades. In the center of the room was my supply cart, the same one I had left at the opposite end of the corridor. It was positioned perfectly, as though someone had carried it here and placed it with care. None of the items were disturbed. Everything was just as I had left it. When I backed away, the lights snapped off for a moment. When they returned, the beds were no longer empty. The mattresses were still sunken, but now each one carried an indented outline of a body, like impressions left in soft clay. No movement, no sound, just shapes where nothing should have been. My vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, I found myself standing in the normal supply hallway again. My cart beside me. The mysterious corridor was gone, replaced by the same bright linoleum and sterile smell I knew well. I finished the inventory and left without telling anyone. I still don't know whether I walked into an abandoned part of the hospital or something that wasn't meant to be found at all. I was sorting old records in the basement archive, a place few people visited anymore. The air was stale, filled with the dust of decades, and the only light came from a single overhead bulb that flickered every few seconds. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the darkness, holding files from long before I started working at the hospital. My task was simple: box the outdated charts and bring them upstairs for digital scanning. I moved mechanically from shelf to shelf until I spotted a folder wedged tightly between two binders. It didn't have a label. No name, no date, nothing. The paper itself looked older than the rest, yellowing, fragile, almost brittle at the edges. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully and found a set of medical notes written by hand. The handwriting was precise but tense, as if the person writing had been in a hurry or under stress. Every page referenced a patient without giving a name, only an ID number that didn't match any format we currently used. The notes mentioned unusual symptoms, periods of unresponsiveness, sudden surges of physical strength, and episodes where the patient's vital signs dropped so low that the equipment registered them as dead. The final page was different. It described the patient vanishing from a locked room during a routine check. No explanation, no follow-up. The report ended abruptly, and the writer signed it with initials I didn't recognize. When I lowered the folder, I noticed something strange. A faint trail of dust had been disturbed on the floor, leading deeper into the archive. It was a thin line, almost like someone had been dragged or had walked while barely touching the ground. The trail disappeared behind a row of shelves that I had avoided earlier because the light didn't reach that far. I followed it. The darkness thickened the farther I walked. The buzzing bulb behind me grew dim until it became a distant glow. My own footsteps sounded muffled, as though the air had turned heavy. I reached the end of the shelf and found a narrow gap I hadn't noticed before. Inside it, a single hospital bed had been placed against the wall. The frame was old, rusted in places, and the mattress was stained with time. A thin blanket lay neatly folded at the foot, untouched by dust, as though someone had been there recently. At the head of the bed rested a wristband, cracked and faded. The ID number matched the one from the file. The temperature dropped sharply. My skin prickled, and without understanding why, I stepped back. The moment I did, the light overhead blinked once and steadied. The entire basement hummed with familiar electricity again. When I looked back into the gap, the bed was gone. The space was empty, as if it had never been there. I returned to the shelves and placed the unmarked file back exactly where I found it. I boxed up everything else and left the basement without once looking behind me. The next morning, I checked the archives list to see if the ID number had ever existed. There was no match. The initials in the file didn't belong to any staff, past or present. The file itself wasn't supposed to be there. I still think about the bed in the dark corner and the wristband waiting on the pillow.